Tim already already gave the plug about our Open Government Summit, and I think you all have an agenda there. We're going to be going through some of these requirements today. We'll be going through it in more depth at the Open Government Summit 101. It's really the Open Government Summit that we have in January is really aimed, we only do it once every other year in January, and it's really aimed at new members and newly appointed members. We really want to get to you before the law gets to you, really. So that's our purpose of doing that, so I would urge you to do that. There's an email address where you can RSVP to. So we'll go through some of the requirements today. I want to take some of the fear out of that and some of the expectations out. These laws do get sort of complicated. There are a lot of loopholes or steps to go through and places where you can get caught up. I want you to ask questions as we go on. I think it's more interesting to answer your questions than to hear from me. But you're not going to leave here an expert in the Open Meeting Act and the Access to Public Record Act. My goal really is that when these issues arise, you realize that there is an issue, you know where to get your answer to, rather than just not even knowing that there's an issue that's arising. So that's really my goal for today, to kind of keep things a little simplified. Just to go through the book, and this will actually help us a little bit when I just said knowing where the answers are. So, and I know it's not tabbed, so it's a little bit tough. There is a copy of the Open Meeting Act here, and as I go on for the presentation, you'll see some cites on the bottom of the screen, and those cites will correspond to the parts of the law that we're going to be talking about. So you can always go back there. And again, it's not tabbed or page numbered, but after the open meeting law, what we've done is an open meeting checklist. And this might be one of your more helpful documents when you have to go into executive session, when you have to, what has to be in your minutes, when you have to post notice, where that notice has to be. What we've done is we've taken the requirements and we've done a checklist for what those requirements are. So, you know, for instance, have you posted your notice? There's two types of notices. Check those off when those have been posted. Where have those been posted? It says exactly where on this checklist they have to be posted. So we've tried to simplify it for all members of public bodies, and I think that will be one of the more helpful documents. And then there's a PowerPoint presentation, a copy of what we're going to be going through today for you to take notes if you wish, and the same thing with the Access to Public Records Act, a copy of the law and a PowerPoint presentation. So again, you know, feel free to ask questions as we go on. Starting with the Open Meeting Act, it starts with really the purpose, and the purpose is that government business be performed in an open and public manner, and that the public be advised of the deliberations and decisions that go into making of public policy. And we've had many people say to us, well, we're not making any decisions today, we're not taking any action, we're just going to talk about the issue, does that have to be in public? And you see by the express policy or the purpose of the Access of the Open Meeting Act that does have to be, and you'll see later on that it does. So we're not just talking about your actions being, when you're taking an action, that those being done in public, we're also talking about the decisions and the talking that go into making those decisions. Those are part of the Open Meetings Act and have to be done in open. If you're going to leave with one thing today, I think it's really this screen and the next couple of screens that we're going to talk about. When does the Open Meeting Act apply? Does it apply today? Did you post notice today? Did you have to post notice today? If you're going out to dinner with school committee members, does that have to be posted? Why or why not? And in order for the Open Meeting Act to apply, you have to have these three threshold elements. There has to be a quorum, there has to be a public body, and there has to be a meeting. All three of those have to be present. If they are, the Open Meeting Act applies to you, and you have to comply with all of its provisions. If one of them does not, then you don't. And so what's a public body? I think you all pretty much have a good guess that you are parts of public bodies, school committees. But it's not just the school committees, it's subcommittees. So if your school committee appoints a search committee or appoints some other type of subcommittee, that subcommittee is itself a public body. All right, so public bodies, that's the first element. I think that's less in controversy than the next two. You have to have a quorum. Quorum is defined as a simple majority of the public body. So if your public body has, if your school committee has 5 members, 3 is a quorum. If your subcommittee, a subcommittee, as we just talked about, is its own public body. So you might have a 5-member school committee where 3 is a quorum. You might have a 3-member subcommittee. Well, that 3-member subcommittee, 2 is a quorum. It's its own public body. Even if that subcommittee, let's just say it's made up of 1 school committee member and 2 members of the public, or 3 members of the public, that's its own subcommittee, its own public body. Now, there's something called a walking or rolling quorum, and what I've just said is that you have to have a quorum of a public body present for a meeting in order for the Open Meeting Act to apply. Again, let's assume that 3 members of a public body, that's a quorum. So 2 members, I'm just going to pick on Adam because he's my friendly face today. So if Adam and I are on the school committee and we have a conversation about school committee business, that does not violate the Open Meeting Act. We haven't had a quorum. It's only 2 of us. Now, you may be thinking, I just figured out how to solve everything in the open meeting world. Adam and I are going to have a conversation. That doesn't implement the quorum, but then Adam's going to have a conversation with somebody else. So we're having a series of conversations. Each of them are less than the quorum, but collectively they are a quorum. And that's when we get into a walking or rolling quorum. And our department has said that a walking or rolling quorum does violate the Open Meetings Act. So it's not just one meeting or one instance. It can be a collective or series of conversations, each of those independently less than a quorum, but collectively that they are a quorum. So that also falls under this walking or rolling quorum. It doesn't just have to be committee members. For instance, let's say Adam and I both have a conversation with the superintendent. Well, that's less than a quorum. We leave. And then the superintendent has another conversation with 2 other members of the school committee and says, well, I just talked to these 2 school committee members, and this is what they've said. What do you think? And trying to come to some sort of consensus or some sort of, I guess, modern-day version of the game telephone, that would also violate the Open Meeting Act. So it's not just among committee members. It can be done by third parties also. And then the third threshold element is a meeting. What's a meeting? And a meeting is defined to be a collective discussion of the public body or when the public body takes action over some matter that it has supervision, control, jurisdiction, or advisory power over. So the 2 ways to break this down are, number 1, as I said earlier, it's not just action. It can be discussion, collective discussion amongst members of the public body over a matter that the public body has supervision, control, jurisdiction, or advisory power over. So getting back to my initial question, did you have to post notice for today's meeting? The answer is no. You're all part of a public body. For the sake of argument, let's say that there's a quorum of each independent, the Barrington School Committee, the Bristol School Committee, et cetera. And the meeting requirement hasn't been met. And the reason why is because you're not having a collective discussion amongst yourselves. You may even be asking me questions, and I may be responding with answers, but amongst yourselves, you're not having that collective discussion. Okay? Sure.
So basically what you're saying is, say there's a PTA meeting, and 3 of us go to that PTA meeting. Would that be considered, violation of open meetings?
Okay. So the question, and I'll repeat the question just so everybody has it. The question was really, if 3 members of the school committee go to a PTA meeting, would that violate the Open Meetings Act? And I think, yeah, I don't want to give you a yes or no. I think it depends on what's going to happen. But going to that PTA meeting, if the 3 of the members go to that meeting and have a collective discussion amongst themselves about some matter that they have supervision, control, jurisdiction, or advisory power, yes, it does. But to go to that meeting independently, just because the 3 of you are there, and you're participating in the meeting from different parts of the room, that doesn't violate it, unless the only scenario that I could see where arguably it could would be if you get up and make a point, and then somebody else from the school committee says, that's a good point, I want to, and you've kind of had that discussion, amongst the whole room. That's the only scenario I could really see that happening. So that's the type of situation we're talking about. Going out to dinner. Well, if you go out to dinner and talk about some matter that you have supervision, control, jurisdiction, or advisory power, yes, it does. To go out to dinner and talk about whatever else there is in the world, no.
What if you have a community that before elections is going to have an opportunity for candidates to answer questions? And so you would have some elected officials that might be running again for the position, and there are multiple number of candidates that would be on this open forum. Would that be in violation if they're answering, and there may be some issues that have come up or would be coming forward in the future?
I don't really see that as a violation. If you have a panel discussion, so to speak, and you've got committee members responding to questions, again, they're really not having that type of collective discussion amongst themselves. They're having that discussion with the audience. So I think it's very similar to the question over here. I would also just add, and I think it was sort of suggested in your question that they were incumbents, but the Open Meeting Act only applies once you become elected too. So as council or as school committee members elect, you're subject to the Open Meetings Act, but as a first-time candidate who's not an incumbent, you're not subject to the Open Meetings Act until you've been elected.
Question, just to go back to the slide about rolling, or I'm sorry, the rolling walking forum. Is there a time frame element to that?
We haven't really, and the answers I'm giving you are based on either what the law says or our findings, and we haven't really established a outer limit of the time frame. It's more of really, is that type of discussion, are these series of meetings part of the same discussion? So, you know, I think it's more of a very fact-specific type answer. I couldn't tell you it's based on a week or based on a month.
Okay, because that's my point. If the example you gave, if two school committee members talked to the superintendent and the superintendent went ahead later and talked to the other school committee members, so if that happened 2 weeks later, is that still considered?
I think you're going to have to look at that more based on what the facts are than a hard and fast rule, because you know, there's easily a scenario where I could say yes, that's going to be part of the same conversation, and I think we could also say there's probably a scenario where that's an entirely separate discussion. So.